So, do we have any questions? Lady here, please. About 6 row back. Yeah.
It's a sort of convoluted question, I think. Right at the beginning, you mentioned Buddhism. I'm a writer, by the way, sort of. I mean, inverted commas. We love stories, okay, and telling stories. And you talked about people relating something at the end of the day, getting caught up in the story and exaggerating it and becoming more so. And yet in the kind of Buddhist thing, which I also hugely admire and aspire to, is not getting caught up in stories and the empty mind and that kind of thing. And I think this is to do with what you were saying about getting hooked into thoughts rather. Is the writing process a way actually of getting to that Buddhist state because the stories are going out and therefore you're not getting caught up in the story once you... Is that what it's all about?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think there's a very strong parallel between this way of working and Buddhist practice. And it comes from my tradition as well in terms of that. It's very interesting for me. It's a very interesting subject that I've looked a lot at. And firstly, Buddhism tells stories all the time, doesn't it? So it makes use of stories all the time. If you think of the Zen koans or in Buddhist practice, teachers use metaphors all the time to convey their points. But I think it's absolutely what you say, that it's about how we use our minds. It's about skillful use of the mind. In Wild Words practice, I give people sometimes quite specific questions to ask to enable the process. So I absolutely do use the thinking mind in doing that. But I also use practices that encourage them not to get caught in those loops. So it's also very similar in terms of presence, I think. Buddhism really is about coming back to presence, isn't it? And Wild Words is the same, that if we have that contact with experience, either remembered experience or experience in our immediate environment, if we have that contact, then we are present, I think. And then it's not about jettisoning the thing. Jettisoning. It's not about jettisoning the thinking mind, but it's about how to use it skillfully to enable a process. Yeah, to enable a healthy process in terms of how we function. Is that?
Yeah, I still get conflicted about story, the letting go of stories and then getting caught up in them. Because you need to be caught up in them to write about them in a way.
Yeah, you do. It's quite experiential. I understand exactly what you're asking, and the problem is it's very experiential. It's difficult to answer on a theoretical level.
Yeah.
We work quite a lot with exercises that help to see that there's quite subtle differences between getting caught up in a way that's unhelpful and going with a train of associations that's helpful. Because one is very enabling for our process and one sabotages it, and they're quite subtle. It's quite experiential. So, yeah.
Lady.
Thank you for your talk. I concur with your interest in body intelligence. I'm really interested in memory. Do you have any concept of where memory might be lodged? Because I don't think it's only in the brain myself.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. My feeling is, the way it seems to be going on the kind of scientific evidential level is that it seems to be held as much in the body as in the brain. It seems to be that we have memory in each cell. Cells hold memory. And certainly, patterns of body posture hold memories. You see in therapeutic work all the time that if you work with patterns of tension in the body, that memories come up. And we all have experience of having certain triggers that bring up memories that seem to be from a body-based place. So I absolutely concur. I feel that it's much more appropriate and helpful to consider that memory is held in the whole body, really. And there's an associated subject, isn't there, about how accurate memories are. I don't think that's exactly what you're asking, but for me, memories are also symbolic representations of what needs to process in our body mind. They aren't always specifically factual. If you talk to a friend who experienced the same situation as you or the same event as you 10 years ago, you'll find that you often have quite different views of what happened. So, it's not at all fixed memory, is it? It's a very blurred line, I think, between fact and fiction, which is very interesting to work with as well. Yeah.
Gentleman right in front here, blue.
want to make a point that relates to your last answer. I feel that there's something missing in the structure of what you're doing. And that is that we all are descendants from ancient man. And ancient man lived in the environment that you're talking about. And I believe that there are vestiges of that ancient man or woman in all of us, and that there are things to be found in our psyche, deep in our psyche perhaps, that gives us an insight to what it was. So that what I'm talking about really is the idea of rediscovering the wild woods and so on, by simply digging in our ancient past, because it's there. And I have a personal thing of finding that I absolutely love a clearing in a woods. And I don't know why, but it's just something. And I'm sure that there are other memories that people have that relate to our ancient ancestors, that is a vestige of how they lived and how they lived in wild places.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, no, thank you for adding that. I think that's a really valid and interesting point. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Any others?
Well, could I dive in?
Yeah.
Last year, I was involved with a workshop here where we concentrated on what was called hot penning, or free writing. And I found that's a discipline that seems to align very much with what you're saying. In other words, don't think too much about what you're writing in a cerebral sense, but write just what comes out of a natural sense. It really the emotional side of the brain. Would that be something you'd like to comment on?
Yeah. I think free writing is really valuable, and it can be brilliant for kind of getting one step ahead of the rational mind. But if the rational mind has a tendency to kick in for us in unhelpful, difficult, challenging ways, then free writing is great for just getting in there before it. So. And it's a wonderful way of experiencing metaphor, isn't it? It's a wonderful way of just seeing how rich and valuable our bodies and minds are in terms of their abilities to make associations in different realms and to fly off to all sorts of magical places. So I think it's great. I do use that quite often, wild words. It's not the only thing I use because of my issue with catharsis and cathartic. Because what can sometimes happen is that people who have very difficult emotional experiences that they're holding, that can be a trigger for all sorts of things to come up, and in quite an uncontained way. So for me, that free writing would be a very helpful kind of introductory thing to do, and then I would bring in other things that create a safer container in which to bring out that stuff more from the depths, I suppose.
I like the idea of it being dangerous.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another thing about free writing I've found is that it's always better earlier in the day. I mean, it sounds a very banal thing to say, but if you come to say wild writing, after a day's work, let's say, where your head is full of all the traffic and nonsense and garbage of the day, does that impede the process, or would you... in other words, is there a preparation one can make before going into the one?
I think that the thing about connecting with sensory impressions is very valuable in that way. I feel, because actually the sort of being caught up in the kind of concerns of the day and what's gone on in the day is a kind of disconnection. When I say disconnection, I don't necessarily mean it negatively, because we disconnect in all sorts of ways that are very helpful to help us deal with various situations that feel like too much. So I don't mean it negatively, but maybe before coming into a process of writing, which is a process of contact, it can be very helpful, I think, just to kind of touch base with your physical being a bit, and with the smells and tastes and textures around you. I think that's very helpful for coming back as a preparation before writing. Yeah.
There's a question at the back.
Alluding to the previous questioner, there is a word which encapsulates using woodlands, which is biophilia.
Yes.
So how would you rate, Bridget, the use of woodlands for writing as opposed to other elements in the landscape?
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. I love woodlands. I think they're great places to write. Different parts of landscape have different qualities, I think, which is also something that's quite interesting to explore. Our reactions are very different to different types of environment, aren't they? When we go outside today, we're going to be trying to use the river as a metaphor for flow and block. And we only have a little river here at Dartington at the moment, so we're not talking about great whooshing rivers. But that's an example of, a river is very conducive to be used as a metaphor for flow, for example. And woodlands have a different quality, don't they? They have different feeling to them. Trees are wonderful around feelings of kind of stability and growth and abundance, and they're very good also for looking at shadow, using physical shadows as light and dark, as a way of exploring light and dark in ourselves. So I think so a bit comes back to metaphor in terms of different landscapes are useful for bringing up different stuff for us, I suppose. But I often do workshops in woods. Partly because I love my metaphor of tracking a wild animal, and it seems to work very well in woods because there's places for animals to hide. There's a sense of something hidden, something revealed, which is really, really useful in terms of my work. So, yeah, is that yeah.
Another question here, please. Gentleman in the front.
I hope you'll forgive me for I come back.
Yes, of course.
I discovered not so long ago that my surname, which is Stebbing, is Anglo-Saxon, and it means stump, stump of a tree. Or another interpretation is of a clearing in the forest.
Ah, yes. Oh, thank you. Lovely. Lucky. How lucky you are to have that surname. Great.
Question.
Use the opportunity to say something very briefly.
Could you speak into the... Thank you.
Our problem seems that we don't seem to sufficiently be able to understand that culture is the fruit of nature. And when we mean nature, we mean, I think, wilderness. Unless we can understand wilderness, and sadly there's very little left of it, one has to go to North America, to Africa, parts of Asia or Africa. But here we are very short of it. The wilderness experience perhaps is best expressed in the publications of the Sierra Club in North America. I suggest you look into that.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
I'm sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you. Useful information.
I'm just going to have some up here as well, in case you can't see me. Next one round. After this one.
Okay, could we take this gentleman on? Did you? Yes. Yes. And then up there.
Hi, thanks for your talk. It's not so much a question, I just wanted to add my take on it, which is that I think we need to be, to use a psychotherapeutic term, person-centered towards ourselves. You were mentioning therapy as being sort of closely allied with the process of writing, and I find that the person-centered paradigm is a useful one, whereby the therapist isn't an expert who's acting like a sort of surgeon on a sort of subject, which was sort of Freud's medical paradigm. But in the Rogerian person-centered paradigm, the therapist is just facilitating process in the client. And I think process is everyone's salvation, and problems start when process gets stuck. And I think that's why we love stories, because they're all about process, and that's ultimately what we all are. It's what life is. It's a process. And stories are just picking out one of the many threads of that process. And I think that's what makes Anglo-Saxon such a great literary culture. It's not just Shakespeare or Keats. It's actually people from the third division, like Bram Stoker, for example. The reason Dracula has been turned into a film so many times is because it's telling a story of archetypal significance, which resonates with all of us. And I think that's why also in the German culture, the Grimm's folk tales are far more vital than Hans Christian Andersen's saccharine fairy stories, because they're talking about archetypal energies which operate in all of us.
Yes.
And when they interact, those archetypal energies, and the process happens. And so in a way, we're all a story.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, we're all a story, and the issue is whether the story's happening or not.
Yes, the issue is what level of the story. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
Question right at the back there.
Thank you. It's a question that goes back to a piece that you were talking about earlier on about working with clients who are expressing things through writing and finding out the safe way to do that. So just wanted to know what your method was if you have someone within your workshops who's expressing difficult emotions and then maybe goes over the edge, possibly even to the extreme of psychosis. So how do you hold that and how do you guide that beyond what you've already said?
Yeah, okay. I don't let people get to a point of overwhelm, is the first thing. My approach is not to have people force their way into things. You know, there can be a tendency among us, we want to work hard often. There can be a tendency, we want to find out what's going on in our inner lives and what happened in our past, and we can sometimes try and force our way into memories and into re-experiencing things when we're not ready to do that. I think a part of functioning from the wild is appreciating that everything our body and mind is doing is a strategy for keeping us safe. It may be a misplaced strategy, it may not function very well anymore, it may be a historical strategy that is a bit outdated, but it's all there for positive reasons. And so the first thing really is that I make sure that people, whenever possible, don't push into things that they're not ready to face. That they appreciate that if it's difficult to go somewhere, for whatever reason, that there is a reason for that, and that we work by accepting the positive nature of the strategy that's being employed first. I also look very carefully for signs of coming overwhelm in people. And this thing about activation, you can see in people's bodies when they're activated by something. When something is very strong for them emotionally, you can see the wild animal come out. You can see the tension come into the arms and legs ready to run, and you can see the pulse rate pick up, and you can see the colour drain from their face. So there are all sorts of clues about what level of activation people are at around a subject. And it's certainly possible to spot the point at which it's looking like it's going to be too much for people, at which point I bring them immediately back to a sense of resource around nature. Oh, look at that beautiful flower. Oh, look at the clouds. Feel your feet on the ground. Bring them back to their senses. So in that way, touch wood, so far I've never been confronted by a situation where somebody has done something that has re-traumatized them anyway or sent them into psychosis in any way. And it's not impossible that will happen. I'm a human being as well, and we're in group situations where I'm having to watch what's going on with a lot of people at the same time, although I have assistants often. But not to say it won't ever happen, but certainly bringing people back before they're overwhelmed, not letting people force their way into things is very helpful. Bringing them back to resources, very helpful.
Well, I think we must draw it to a close there. Many, many thanks, Bridget. It's been the most inspiring session. And let's hope there are no traumatising experiences in the workshop to come. Many, many thanks.
Okay.